The Galactic Consortium had seen many strange things in its long history. It had seen wars that lasted 1,000 years, and peace treaties written in the blood of kings. It had seen stars die, and new ones born. It had seen species rise from the mud of their home worlds, and reach out to touch the stars with their bare hands. But in all its long history, in all its records and archives and libraries, no one had ever seen anything quite like the humans. They were strange. That was the word most species used. Not dangerous, not powerful, just strange. They named their warships after poets. Their fastest and deadliest destroyer class was called the Keats. Their most powerful battlecruiser carried the name Neruda. When the consortium asked why, the humans smiled and said that poets understood suffering better than anyone, and a ship should know what it was fighting to protect. They sent flowers to alien funerals. Real flowers, grown in special greenhouse bays aboard their diplomatic vessels, because they believed that living things carried more comfort than printed cards. When the Velhari lost their home moon to a meteor storm, a human freighter arrived 3 days later carrying seeds, thousands of them, for whatever the Velhari wanted to grow in their new home. The Velhari still talked about it 200 years later. They cried at music. Not their own music. Any music. An ambassador from the cold and logical Mreth people had once played a traditional mourning song at a consortium gathering, fully expecting no one outside his species to understand it. A human diplomat in the third row had tears running down her face before the second verse. The Mreth ambassador had not known what to do with that. He had thought about it for years. Consul Maravos was, by the standards of her species, a very good example of all of this. She was 53 years old, with gray threading through her dark hair, and lines at the corners of her eyes that came from smiling more than from worry. She had been humanity's senior envoy to the consortium for 11 years. In that time, she had helped end 3 border conflicts, negotiated 2 resource-sharing agreements that had kept minor species from starving, and personally talked a Gorathi fleet commander down from launching an attack that would have killed 6 million people. She had done this last thing by sitting across from him for 9 hours and simply listening to everything he was angry about. She was very good at listening. The chamber of the Consortium Grand Assembly was large enough to hold the delegates of 47 species, and on this particular morning it was full. The issue before the assembly was the Vreth Dominion, and what to do about it. The Vreth were not strange. They were, in fact, exactly what most species expected when they imagined a powerful empire. They were tall, gray-skinned, and precise in everything they did. They spoke in careful, measured sentences. They did not name their warships after poets. They named them after theorems. They had been expanding along the galactic rim for 60 years, and the expansion had been, by their own description, efficient. They absorbed smaller civilizations by giving them a simple choice: join the Dominion or be removed. They did not use the word destroyed. They found it imprecise. The Vreth delegate to the assembly was a being called Viel Thorn. He stood at his podium with his hands folded and explained, in very clear language, that the Dominion's recent movement into the Outer Rim territories was a matter of internal reorganization and not subject to consortium review. His voice was calm. His logic was clean. He had a very good answer for every objection raised. Consul Voss had been sitting quietly through all of it. When she finally stood, the chamber settled into a particular kind of silence. Other delegates had spoken with anger, or with careful legal argument, or with thinly hidden fear. Voss stood up the way a person stands when they have made a decision and are at peace with it. She spoke for 4 minutes. She talked about the 3 small species currently living in the territories the Vreth called reorganized. She said their names. She described where they lived and what they grew, and what their children looked like when they played outside in the morning light. She talked about them the way humans always talked about living things, like they mattered, like the specific details of their existence were worth knowing. Then she looked directly at the Vreth delegate and said something that no one in the chamber expected. She said, very quietly, "I am not here to threaten you. I am not here to lecture you about law. I am asking you, one intelligent species to another, to please think carefully before you continue down this road. Not because we will stop you with force today, but because I know my people, And I know what happens to us when something we love is destroyed. I am asking you to take that seriously. Please do not make us angry. Not for our sake. For yours." There was no dramatic pause after she said it. She simply sat down and folded her hands on the table in front of her. Valethorn waited a moment, then responded that the consortium had no legal standing to interfere in Dominion affairs, and that emotional appeals, while touching, were not a substitute for policy. Several delegates nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. Nothing was voted on. The session ended 2 hours later, with no resolution passed. In the corridor outside the chamber, a young Vreth intelligence officer named Greth Voss pulled up humanity's full historical record on his data tablet. His job was to assess threats. He had rated humans as low priority for years. Their military was modest. Their territory was not especially large. Their emotional behavior was well documented as a cultural quirk rather than a strategic factor. He scrolled through their history now, quickly, looking for anything relevant. He saw wars. Many wars. He saw weapons built in secret and used with terrifying precision. He saw something called the Manhattan Project and noted it with mild interest, a weapons program, completed in under 3 years, involving over 100,000 people who had kept it almost entirely secret. He saw an arms buildup during something called the Cold War that had taken 2 nations to the absolute edge of destroying their own planet. And he noted that even then, they had pulled back. He closed the file. His report, filed that evening, and routed to the Vreth High Council's low-priority inbox, read as follows. Humanity poses no credible military threat to Dominion operations at current time. Historical aggression patterns are pre-civilized and largely internal. Current behavior suggests stable pacification. No further monitoring recommended. He set his tablet down and went to dinner. Outside the station's observation window, a human diplomatic shuttle was leaving dock. It was a small, graceful ship, and painted along its hull in careful letters was the name it had been given, the Mary Oliver, after a poet who had written about paying attention to the world. No one at the station's traffic control desk understood why a diplomatic ship would be named after a poet. The shuttle slipped into the dark between the stars and was gone. The colony of Kalis Prime had been home to 40 million people. It had schools and hospitals, and a morning market that ran every day along the wide main road of its capital city. Children had grown up there who had never seen Earth, who knew the word home and meant the orange-tinted sky of Kalis, the particular smell of its soil after rain, the sound of its birds at sunrise. People had been born and buried there across 4 generations. It had been, in every real sense of the word, a place. The Vreth called what happened there a territorial integration. They were very precise with language. The consortium learned what had occurred from a single automated emergency buoy that managed to escape before the communication blackout went up. The message it carried was 11 seconds long. It was a human voice, a woman's voice, calm and clear, in the way that people are calm when they have decided to do the last useful thing available to them. She said the date and the coordinates. She said that Vreth ships had arrived 6 hours ago. She said that resistance had been attempted and had failed. She said that she could not tell yet what was happening to the people. Then, the message ended. The consortium chamber was quiet when the recording finished playing. Every species represented had a different reaction. The Velhari wept openly, which was their way. The Mreth sat very still, which was theirs. The Garathi representatives exchanged looks that meant nothing good. Other delegates began speaking at once, voices layering over each other, filling the chamber with the particular noise of people who were afraid and did not want to show it. Consul Voss sat without moving through all of it. When the noise finally died, she stood. She did not ask for the floor. She simply stood, and the chamber went quiet on its own, the way chambers do when something is about to be said that people sense will matter. She said that she would be traveling to the Vreth Dominion capital to speak directly to the High Council. She said she was going alone. No fleet. No armed escort. Just herself. Several delegates objected. She listened to all of them. Then she thanked them for their concern and left the room. The Vreth High Council chamber was cold by design. The Vreth thought better in the cold. It was a tall, gray room with clean lines and no decorations of any kind, because decorations served no function. The 7 members of the High Council sat behind a long curved bench and watched the human woman walk in. She was not what they had expected. She was not tall. She was not severe. She was dressed simply, and she walked with the unhurried step of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, which the council found mildly confusing, given the circumstances. High Chancellor Drevson welcomed her with the formal Vreth greeting, and waited for the threats to begin. He had been in politics for 40 years. He knew how these meetings went. Consul Voss thanked him for receiving her. Then she talked about Kalis Prime. She did not use legal language. She did not cite treaties or resolutions or articles of consortium law. She talked about the colony the way she had talked about it when it still existed, like it was a real place where real people had lived. She described the morning market. She talked about a school that had been built in the 2nd generation of settlement, with windows that faced east so the children could watch the sunrise while they learned to read. She talked about a man named Ori, who had run the market's bread stall for 30 years and whose grandmother had been born on Earth. She talked about his grandmother too. She spoke for 11 minutes. Her voice did not shake. She did not raise it. She did not seem to be performing grief. She seemed to simply be telling the truth about something that had mattered, in the way that humans told the truth, which was directly and without embarrassment. When she finished, the council chamber was silent. High Chancellor Drevson was a logical being. He processed the speech for what it was, an emotional appeal designed to create sympathy, and he prepared a measured response. He would acknowledge the disruption to civilian life. He would explain that integration protocols minimized casualties wherever possible. He would offer a process for claims and inquiries. But before he could speak, Consul Voss said one more thing. She said, "I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty. My people are not naturally violent. We spend a great deal of effort, every day, being something other than what our history says we are capable of being. We work very hard at peace. We work very hard at patience. We work very hard at finding another way before we find the last way. This is not weakness. It takes more strength to hold a thing back than it does to let it go." She paused for just a moment. "I am asking you one final time. Please do not make us angry. Not for our sake. For yours." The High Chancellor looked at her for a long moment. Then he said that the Dominion respected humanity's long diplomatic tradition. He said that integration had already been completed and could not be reversed. He said that while he understood the emotional difficulty of the situation, the Dominion operated under its own sovereign law and not under the emotional preferences of other species. He did not laugh at her. He was too precise for that. But there was something in his voice, very controlled, very subtle, that was in the same family as a laugh. Consul Voss nodded. She thanked him for his time. She stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped for one moment and looked back, not at the Chancellor, but at the room itself, at the cold gray walls and the clean lines, and the absence of anything soft. Then she left. She did not speak on the shuttle back. Her aide, a young man named Pell, watched her face for the entire journey and could not read it. She was not crying. She was not visibly angry. She was the way a deep ocean is when the surface is completely still, and anyone who has ever stood at the edge of deep water knows that still is not the same as calm. Back on Earth, an emergency broadcast interrupted every channel simultaneously. No warning, no build-up, no context. Just a voice, even and flat, that read 3 words in every human language, one after another. They didn't listen. That was all. The broadcast lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds, which was exactly as long as it took to deliver the message in all 41 official human languages. Then it ended, and regular programming returned, and people across the planet sat very still in their living rooms, and offices, and schools, and did not speak for a while. In the consortium chamber, a junior Velhari diplomat turned to his senior and asked what it meant. The senior had been serving in the consortium for 30 years. She had known humans for most of her adult life. She understood, perhaps better than anyone else in that building, what had just been said. She took a slow breath. "It means," she said quietly, "that they tried. And it means the trying is over. The Vreth High Council expected anger. They had modeled it carefully. They had run projections. They knew humanity's fleet count, 312 combat vessels of varying class, against the Dominion's 12,000. They knew the production rates of human shipyards, the range of their weapons, the speed of their fastest ships. They had full intelligence packages on 17 of humanity's 20 active admirals. They expected a sharp, emotional response, followed by a short, painful conflict that would teach the humans the difference between feelings and power. What they got instead was paperwork. A single document arrived at Vreth Dominion offices 3 days after Consul Voss returned from the capital. It was addressed to the High Council, the Vreth Admiralty, and all subsidiary governments of the Dominion. It was written in clean, simple language, with no dramatic phrasing. It identified itself as a notice of restitution. It listed, in precise detail, exactly what had been taken from Kalis Prime. The population, the infrastructure, 41 years of colonial development. It listed what humanity required to be returned. It gave the Vreth a 30-day period to begin compliance. At the bottom, under the formal signatures, was a single additional line. It read, "If these terms are not met, we will meet them ourselves." The Vreth Intelligence Office assigned to Human Affairs filed the document under political theater and moved on. What happened over the next 60 days would later be studied in military colleges across the galaxy for 200 years, and the debate would never fully settle on the right word for it. Some said mobilization. Some said awakening. The Mreth, who were the most precise species in the consortium when it came to language, eventually agreed on a single word: revelation. The first strange report came from a deep space monitoring station near the human border. 3 large freighters, registered as bulk cargo carriers, had deviated from their logged routes. Nothing unusual. Ships changed routes all the time. But when the station's passive sensors got a closer look as the ships passed, the readings did not match the profile of cargo freighters. The mass was wrong. The energy signature was wrong. The ships were the right shape, but they were not what they said they were. The analyst who caught it sent a note to his supervisor. His supervisor forwarded it to the intelligence office. The intelligence office added it to a low-priority monitoring file. 2 days later, there were 11 more reports, just like it. Then 40. Then, within 2 weeks, over 200. Across 3 star systems, objects that had been registered as mining platforms, survey arrays, communication relays, and long-range cargo vessels began to change. Panels that had been smooth hull plating folded back to reveal weapons bays beneath. Structures that had looked like communication arrays resolved under full-spectrum analysis into targeting and fire control systems. Ships that had moved with the slow, rolling gait of heavy freighters suddenly moved like something else entirely, fast and precise, with a purpose that had no patience in it. The Vreth Intelligence Office upgraded the human file from low priority to urgent, then to critical. Then a senior analyst named Greth Voss, who had been quietly reassigned to full-time human assessment, called for an emergency briefing with the High Council. He stood in that cold gray room where Consul Voss had stood a month before, and he told them what he had found. Humanity had not built these ships recently. The analysis of hull materials, of power systems, of the wear patterns on mechanical components, told a different story. The weapons bays had been installed during construction. The targeting systems had been embedded from the beginning. These ships had been built as warships and disguised as something else. Not for any deception they were planning, but as standard practice, a species that hoped for peace and quietly prepared for the alternative, and had been doing so for over 100 years. He showed them the production numbers. Even accounting for the ships they had already identified, the numbers were wrong. The capacity was wrong. Human industrial output, recalculated without the false assumptions his office had been making for decades, was not what the file said. They had been measuring human production by what the humans showed, not by what was possible. He brought up the Manhattan Project again. 130,000 people. $2 billion. 27 months. Near complete secrecy. A weapons program that changed the course of their entire planet's history, built while 2 separate global wars were already being fought. He said, "We assumed this was a historical artifact, evidence of a primitive, pre-civilized phase. We were wrong. It was not a phase. It was a demonstration of what they are capable of when they decide something must be done. They were not primitive. They were practicing. The chamber was quiet. The High Chancellor asked how many ships they were looking at. Greth Voss said he was no longer certain that was the right question. Because the ships were only part of it. On Earth and on human colony worlds, something was happening that had no military name but every military effect. People were not panicking. They were not rioting. They were not afraid. Or if they were afraid, the fear had been folded into something else, something harder and more useful. Factories that had been making agricultural equipment were making weapons components. Universities that had been running theoretical physics programs had, almost overnight, shifted their entire output toward applied engineering. People who had been artists and teachers and doctors were enlisting not because they were forced to, but because 40 million people had called a colony home, and those people had been taken, and every human being alive seemed to have reached the same conclusion at the same moment, without anyone needing to announce it. It was the most frightening thing Greth Voss had ever tried to quantify. He had numbers for ships and weapons and production rates. He did not have numbers for what he was watching on the human broadcasts. He could not measure the particular quality of a species that had decided, quietly and completely, that something was going to be made right. He sent his full report to the High Council with a recommendation that the Dominion enter immediate negotiations. The report was received. While the Council deliberated, the first 200 ships of the new human fleet moved into formation near the border. Aboard the bridge of the lead vessel, Consul Voss, who had accepted a plain gray uniform with no insignia and a posting she had not been asked to take, stood at a wide observation window and watched them move. Her aide, Pell, came and stood beside her and did not say anything for a while. Then he asked if she was all right. She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm angry," she said. "I've been angry since Kalis. I've been holding it very carefully, the way you carry something hot, because I knew we would need it steady and not scattered." She watched the ships move through the dark. The hard thing about anger, when you've been holding it carefully for a long time, is that it becomes very focused. It stops being a feeling and starts being a direction. Pell looked at the fleet outside the window. "Is that worse?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "For us," she said, "no. For anyone in our way, yes." Fleet Marshal Sorath Khan had fought 17 wars. He had fought the long border war against the Gelathi Confederation, which had lasted 9 years and cost both sides more than either had planned. He had fought 3 internal Dominion suppression campaigns that the history books called pacifications. He had fought a short, sharp conflict with the Mreth over transit rights that had ended in 14 days with a treaty that still held. He had, in 40 years of military service, faced every kind of enemy the galaxy had shown him. He had never fought a people before. He understood, in the abstract, that all armies were made of people. But in practice, in every war he had ever commanded, there had been a point, a clear and calculable point, where the cost exceeded the gain, where the logical thing was to stop, and where both sides had recognized it and stopped. War, in Sorath Khan's experience, was a negotiation conducted with weapons. Both parties had things they wanted. They exchanged damage until one side's wants became less important than the pain of continuing. Then it ended. Clean. Logical. Efficient. The humans did not negotiate this way. The first battle was near the border relay station at Keth 4. Sorath Khan had deployed a standard defensive screen 400 vessels, well positioned, with clear lines of fire and solid supply lines. A good defensive position by any measure. The human fleet that met them was smaller. They should not have attacked. Any model Sorath Khan ran said they should have held, waited for reinforcement, or attempted a flanking approach. Instead, they came straight in. Not recklessly. It was not a charge driven by emotion. It was something harder to understand, a direct approach made by people who had decided the position needed to fall and were simply making it fall, at whatever cost. They fought with a precision that his commanders respected, and an endurance that his commanders did not understand. When Vreth ships were destroyed, other Vreth ships pulled back to reassess. When human ships were destroyed, The remaining human ships pressed forward, not because they were ignoring the losses. They clearly knew the losses were happening. They simply had decided that the losses did not change what needed to be done. The relay station fell. Sorath Khan rewrote his threat assessment that evening and submitted it to the High Council with a note that said, very plainly, "We have incorrect assumptions about human decision-making under combat conditions. I need authorization to adjust doctrine." The authorization was slow in coming. It was always slow. The second battle, at the Yarith corridor, was the one that stayed with him. A small group of human destroyers, 11 ships, had taken up position in a transit lane that the Dominion needed for resupply. They were outnumbered 8-1 by the Vreth force sent to clear them. By every measurement, it should have taken 2 hours. Move in. Destroy the blocking force. Move on. It took 19 hours. The human destroyers did not hold because they thought they could win. Sorath Khan was fairly certain they knew they could not win. They held because somewhere behind them, moving slowly through a parallel corridor, was a convoy of refugee ships, carrying civilians from 3 of the smaller species the Dominion had been absorbing. The convoy needed 19 hours to reach a safe jump point. The human destroyers had apparently decided, at some point before the battle began, that this was what the 19 hours were for. All 11 ships were lost. The convoy reached the jump point and escaped. The Vreth commander who had led the assault on the destroyers sent his report to Sorath Khan with a personal note at the end. The note said, "I have been a soldier for 22 years. I have never encountered what I encountered today. These ships did not fight to survive. They fought to spend enough time. I am filing this report correctly, but I want the Marshal to know I do not understand what I witnessed. I am not certain I want to." Sorath Khan read the note 3 times. He requested a direct communication channel with a human commander, and was given a channel to Admiral Daejung Park, who commanded the 4th Human Battle Group. Park was a calm, quiet man, with a plain face, and a way of answering questions that made it clear he was thinking carefully about the answer before he gave it. Sorath Khan asked him directly, "How do you keep fighting when the cost is this high?" Park was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because they were our people. Every species in the galaxy has someone they would burn worlds for. We are not unique in that. We are unique in that we warned you first, and we meant it, and you didn't believe us. That part still hurts, honestly. The warning was real. We wanted you to believe it so we wouldn't be here." Sorath Khan said that from a strategic standpoint, the human approach to losses seemed inefficient. Park said, "I understand why you'd think that. But when 40 million people lose their homes, efficiency isn't the measure we're using anymore." The conversation ended. Sorath Khan sat with it for a long time. He sent 3 more reports to the High Council over the following weeks. Each one was more direct than the last. He said that the standard Vreth approach to war, the negotiation model, the cost-benefit approach, was not working because the humans were not running a cost-benefit calculation. They were running something else. Something that did not have a name in Vreth military doctrine, because the Vreth had never needed a word for it. A war fought not to gain something, but to return something. Not expansion. Not leverage. Restoration. He said it plainly in his 3rd report. They are not trying to defeat us. They are trying to undo what we did. Those are not the same thing, and our entire doctrine is built around the first one. The High Council sent back suggestions about defensive positioning. The consortium sent 3 peace delegations to the human fleet. Each one was received with complete courtesy. Admiral Park served them tea in delicate cups, actual ceramic cups that had been packed in padded cases for exactly this purpose, and listened to every proposal with genuine attention. He asked thoughtful questions. He thanked the delegations for coming. Then he declined to stop. "We will stop," he said each time, to each delegation. "When the people of Kalis Prime are home." It was not a hard line delivered with drama. He said it simply, the way you state a fact about how the world works. The last great battle was near Veth Prime, the Dominion's home system. Sorath Khan had gathered everything he had left. It was, by the numbers, still more than what the humans had brought. He positioned his fleet well. He chose the ground carefully. He did everything right. The Vreth fleet broke on the 2nd day. Not because of losses, The losses were not unsustainable. It broke because of something that happened between the first day and the second. Something quiet and spreading, like water finding its way through a wall. Individual Vreth commanders began making decisions that doctrine did not call for pulling back when not ordered to. Holding positions that served no clear tactical purpose, hesitating at the moment of engagement. When Sorath Khan spoke to his commanders, they were correct and military in everything they said. But there was something absent. The thing that makes a soldier willing to go forward. The certainty that the thing being done is worth doing. It was the first time in Dominion history that a Vreth military force had simply lost the will to continue. Sorath Khan reported to the High Council that the war could not be continued in the current form. The council asked what he recommended. He thought about Admiral Park's face on the communication screen. He thought about 11 destroyers, spending 19 hours buying time for strangers. He thought about Consul Voss standing in this very capital and saying, without any drama at all, "Please don't make us angry. Contact the humans," he said. "And when you do believe them this time, about everything." She looked tired. That was the first thing every ambassador noticed when Consul Mara Voss walked into the Grand Assembly chamber. Not triumphant, not hard, not the way a person looks when they have won something. Just tired, in the deep and specific way of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down, but whose arms still remember the weight. She was wearing plain clothes again. No ceremony, no insignia. The same kind of simple jacket she wore when she was just a diplomat going to work. The chamber was fuller than it had ever been. Every spacefaring species with a consortium seat had sent their full delegation. Some had sent their heads of government. The observation galleries were packed. This was being broadcast across more receiver networks than any event in consortium history. Voss walked to the central podium and put a single sheet of paper on it. Not a data tablet. Paper, because that was a human habit that had survived every technological shift. Certain things, they felt, deserved to be written by hand. The room was already quiet. It went quieter. The terms of the Vreth surrender had been announced that morning, and the galaxy was still adjusting to them. The Vreth Dominion had surrendered unconditionally. The terms that humanity had delivered were the return of all Kalis Prime colonists, full reparations for 41 years of colonial development, a binding commitment to consortium law, enforceable by collective action, no occupation of Vreth territory, no annexation, no punishment beyond consequence. That last part was what the galaxy could not quite absorb. Humanity had the Vreth completely. They had fought through 12,000 ships and reached the home system. They had won in a way that almost never happened in galactic conflict. Not a negotiated draw, not a mutually exhausted ceasefire, but an actual, clean, total victory. And they had used it to ask for exactly what they had asked for at the beginning. The Velhari ambassador, seated in the front row, had been quietly crying since the terms were announced. Not from sadness. The Mreth delegation, who sat beside her, were still trying to process why. A dozen other species were already debating in their delegations what it meant. Some called it generosity. Some called it strategy, keeping the Vreth functional as a buffer against worse things at the rim. Some said it was simply the most efficient path to stability. None of these were wrong. But none of them were quite right either. Consul Voss looked out at the chamber. She spoke for 7 minutes. She said, "Every human child, at some point, learns to say please don't. They learn it before they learn to fight. They learn it because their parents and teachers, and the people who love them, want them to understand something important, that the first choice should always be the peaceful one. Not because the other choices don't exist. They exist. We know they exist very well. We have used them, in our history, in ways that we are not proud of. But the first choice, always, should be the one that doesn't cost anything that can't be given back." She paused. The chamber was so quiet that people in the back could hear the ventilation system. "We warn other species because we know ourselves," she continued. "We have looked inside our own history and seen what lives there, underneath the art and the patience and the kindness we try to practice every day. Something old and very focused. Something that does not tire and does not negotiate and does not stop once it is fully awake. We work every day to be more than that. We work hard at it. Every generation works hard at it. The warnings we give are not performances. They are not strategy. They are us telling you the truth about what you are standing next to, because we think the truth is more respectful than pretending. She looked across the gathered faces of 47 species. The Vreth heard those words and heard weakness. What they were hearing was restraint. The restraint of a species that has stood on this edge before, looked down, and made a choice to step back. We will always choose to step back, if you give us the choice. The Vreth did not give us the choice. And so we are here, and the cost of being here was paid by the people we lost, and by the Vreth people who lost things too, and none of it needed to happen, and all of it is over now. She picked up the paper from the podium. We gave the people of Kalis Prime back their homes today. I would like that to be the last time we ever have to do something like this. So I will say it once more, to everyone in this room and to everyone watching, please, don't make us angry. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket, and stepped back from the podium. The chamber was silent for a long time. The vote on the Prometheus Accords came 2 hours later. The Accords stated, in formal consortium law, that any act of aggression against humanity or its territories would trigger a collective defense response from all member species. It was the strongest mutual defense agreement in consortium history. Every species voted yes. Not all of them voted yes out of love for humanity. Some voted out of clear-eyed calculation about what they had just seen. Some voted because they genuinely admired what had been done and how it had been done. Some voted because they were afraid, and the Accords made the fear more manageable by putting it on the right side of a legal line. All of them voted yes. In the corridor outside the chamber, as the delegations filtered out, Greth Voss found Consul Voss standing near a window. He was no longer technically a Vreth intelligence officer. That office had been dissolved as part of the surrender terms, but he had been permitted to attend the assembly as an observer. He had asked to speak with her before he left. She had said yes. He stood in front of her and thought about everything he wanted to say. He thought about the low-priority report he had filed after that first consortium session. He thought about the file he had read too late, about the Manhattan Project and the Cold War, and all the other things he had labeled primitive and moved past. He thought about 11 destroyers in the Yareth corridor. He asked her one question. Did you always know it would come to this? She looked at him for a moment before she answered. It was not an unfriendly look. It was the look of someone who was being careful to be honest. No, she said. We hoped it wouldn't. We always hope. That is the other thing that no one seems to understand about us. We are not a pessimistic species. We built the warships, and we wrote the warnings, and we maintained the doctrine for 200 years, and through all of it, in some part of us, we kept hoping we would never need any of it. Every time someone new arrives in the galaxy, we hope they will be the ones who believe us, that they will hear the warning and take it seriously, and nothing will have to happen. She paused. We still hope, she said. Even now. Greth Voss held out his hand, uncertain. He had learned the human custom from a research file. She shook it without hesitation, and the small surprise on his face when she did made something tired in her expression ease, just briefly, into something that was almost a smile. Then she thanked him for coming, and walked away down the long corridor with the easy, unhurried step of someone who had somewhere to be, and no reason to rush getting there. In the centuries that followed, no species would mistake humanity's patience for weakness again. The lesson had been paid for at a price no one had wanted to pay, and it had been written into law and carved into the face of the consortium building in every language that had been spoken in that chamber. Scholars would argue for generations about whether the humans had been wise or reckless, strategic or simply heartbroken, calculating or just stubbornly certain. The answer, as people who knew them well could have said, was that it had never been one thing or the other. It had been all of it at once. The warmth and the warning. The poet's name on the warship. The ceramic teacups packed in padded cases for a peace talk held in the middle of a war. They were strange. The humans. That was still the word most species used, but no one used it carelessly anymore.